Sharing our stories connects us. Listen and be connected. Join us for the conversation meeting weekly at the intersection of community and culture. Hosted by Mario Nunez and Joe King Carter.
Are you there, Mario? Are you coming in loud and clear from the surface of Mars?
I am indeed, but I'm not really truthfully on the surface of Mars. How am I coming into you guys?
You sound good, brother.
All right, good. Well, let's start the show as we normally do, even though it's a little bit different. Hi, everybody. It's Wednesday. It is your noonday wake-up call. This is Wednesday Hump Day, Hump Hour. This is the conversation. You're listening to WMNF 88.5. I'm your host, Mario Nunez. As always, I'm seated alongside, but today it's a little bit different. I'm actually coming to you remotely, but I'm alongside my broadcast partner. That's you, sir.
Yes, sir. Joe King Carter. I'm so glad that you are on the line.
I am on the line, so to speak. I'm like that bird on a wire, but even more importantly, I just want everybody to know that's listening out there that I am dedicated, highly dedicated to task. And even though I can't be there in person, I'm calling in from a remote location because this morning, unfortunately, one of our pets took ill, a little bit of a serious illness, and we had to do some emergency intervention. So I'm presently sitting in the parking lot, facing the veterinary clinic, and Sally is inside with our cat. So we're going to proceed as normal. Joey?
Yes.
How was your week, my partner? How was your week?
As always, my week was delightful for the most part with the normal human stresses that we all have. But the world is getting weirder and weirder out there. I saw a meme that said it showed a picture of a squirrel in a kind of flabbergasted position saying, at least now I know where all the nuts are. So the world is getting strange out there. But I persevere as someone who is trying to maintain a positive attitude because that's really all we've got, right? And also, while I've taken the line, let me just say that this Saturday is Tropical Heat Wave at the Cuban Club, ladies and gentlemen, everyone out there listening. And this is a big, big event. So please, we have not been discussing it all that much on our show here, and the music shows and everyone else probably has pushed it a little harder. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're on board and highly supportive of one of the greatest events of the year.
It's our big fundraiser, and absolutely, it's hot. It's hot, and it's hot in more ways than one.
Yes.
So as the afternoons heat up and the evenings heat up as well, which is probably the saddest part, because, we would expect that during the daytime hours, it gets hot. But we always appreciated the fact that the evenings allowed us a cool breeze, a modicum of cool. But that, unfortunately, is starting to wane now. We're starting to get those days.
It will be a microwave oven outside soon.
And I'm not feeling it at all.
No.
The humidity can just go fly a kite for all I can say about that.
There it is, yeah.
Joey, who's our guest today in studio? Because I know who it is. You know who it is, but
yes.
Maybe we should share that with our audience.
Yeah, well, we have a guest today that I think is already well known to a number of different Venn diagram overlapping circles in the community. If you are a person who's interested in history, if you are a person who's interested in the academic application and research of history, if you are someone who is interested in Tampa's histories, and if you are someone who really enjoys a Cuban sandwich, all of those things and more probably means that you know who Andy Hughes is. So I'm going to say welcome to Andy.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Mario.
Andy, of course, my brother, of course. Thank you for always being ready to jump into your booth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And answer the call.
Absolutely. So, as we always do here, Andy, for those of you who may not know, we're going to get to our topic, and we're going to get to some of the interesting things that Andy has done and is doing. He is an author. He is a curator at the Special Collections at the USF Library, and that's a big job, folks. But let's talk a little bit about where did you grow up, Andy?
I grew up in Clearwater. I was born in Chicago, but my family moved to Clearwater in '79. So I was still a young pup, and definitely Clearwater is where I spent most of my time growing up. Yeah. And then I came out here for college. So I was, in my early, mid-20s when I came out here.
Okay. Came out here as came to Tampa.
Yes, came to Tampa, across the bay, right.
And so Clearwater was, what kind of community did you grow up in Clearwater?
I mean, there were still green spaces to play in. So, I often say I probably would have had a much different life trajectory if I grew up in Pinellas now.
Right.
Just because there's no place to get away to.
Yes.
And I think that helped keep me out of trouble.
Yes.
So anyway, I spent a lot of time playing in any, green patch that I could find. So
right.
That's what my younger days that I spent most of my time, doing there in Pinellas County.
And did you have siblings?
Yeah, 2 brothers. Yeah.
And what are they older or younger?
I'm the middle kid.
You're the middle child.
Yeah, I've got an older brother and a younger.
I see. So the middle child's always negotiating out the...
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, there it is. So you grew up in Clearwater, and you go to, what was the high school you went to?
Clearwater High.
Clearwater High. Wow, this is like...
Tornadoes, brother, the tornadoes.
Right.
The Tornadoes. That's right. Excellent. So, okay, so you're in high school, and now what happens after high school?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure out what to do next. I think I'm going to be an English major because I like to write, but I was quickly disabused of that notion. I started at USF, and it just didn't resonate with me, and I had to think quick about switching a major. I think that's, you get penalized, and universities get penalized for students changing majors, but I think it's one of the rites of passage of being a student, is like you've got to be able to figure out what your passion is. And if you have to make a change, do it. Yes. So I did, and I didn't lose a lot of time as a result. It was just one semester. So I became a history major, and largely out of a lack of trying to figure out what else to do. But immediately I knew I was in the right place. It felt really good.
So through feeling, that's a very interesting concept right there. Through how you felt about it, because you probably, if you're like me, I did an art history degree and a studio degree, and somebody probably was looking at me saying, "Are you ever going to make a living?" Apparently, you two were in that position where you weren't thinking a lot about the job application.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Yeah. So you went with your heart.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, that's what I did. And yeah, I didn't really have any master plan or anything like that.
Right.
So, but I did, my brothers did not take the opportunity to go to college like I did. But my parents, gave me the opportunity. I really, I need to thank them, in large part. So I really felt like, I would take the ball and run with it. And
right.
So I finished, and I actually incorporated my English credits. I got a double major. So I got a double BA degree, so I wasn't wasting any credit hours.
Right.
And then decided, for lack of other things to do, I went straight into graduate school in history. So in 2000 is when I got my master's degree in history, and by then I was already working at the library full-time at USF. I was doing stuff having to do with the media center when we still had a media center to speak of. And anyway, over time, everything I started to shift into special collections. So I transferred my job, and then eventually I got, some people were telling me you should go into library school. And, if I were to get a PhD in history, I had like visions of begging for a job in Iowa somewhere.
Right.
Someplace I didn't want to be.
Right.
And so, and then teaching students who are half asleep all the time. So
right.
It just didn't really appeal to me. So the library thing did. And I'm so glad I did, because I really enjoy helping people with their research, whether it be a student or someone from the community or a visiting scholar or anything like that. I love that, that's where the rubber hits the road,
Right.
And so I also like it because special collections is sort of like the inner sanctum of the library. So only the students who are trying really hard, tend to even reach out to someone in special collections.
Interesting, yes.
So it's great because I tend to work with a lot of students who are motivated, and so that's kind of stuff. It just keeps me going too.
So
Andy, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
Sure. So remind everybody, because when and it's a little bit different for me today, boys, because I'm sitting here listening intently, almost as if I'm a voyeur, almost as if I'm one of your radio listeners, because usually at this point I'm in studio looking at you guys eyeball to eyeball, so we can, know where the flow goes and when I can.
That's right.
I'm just going to jump in when I can.
Sure.
But it also forces me to listen more, because if I'm guilty of any one thing, and people who know me, it's like not listening enough. So I'm jumping in when I shouldn't, but I'm writing things down. This is a whole different experience for me. But I want Andy to, and it's good that he brought up special collections, because that is, in all facets, a very special, quote, air quotes, collections. Mm-hmm. Andy, tell everybody what's involved in that, what kind of wonderful artifacts and things you have in there, and is that something that's open to the public?
Yeah, thanks for that prompt, Mario, because I think it's really important that people do know that special collections exist. So I describe it as an inner sanctum of the library. It's where the stuff that's too rare or just too cool to live elsewhere lives. Mm-hmm. So it's the kind of things that if someone were to take off with our 1853 map of Tampa, we couldn't replace it.
Right.
And so that's where special collections comes from, because there's an aspect of security that, we have to keep the items secure. But then also, we're a state-funded organization, so it's really our responsibility to share it with the wider public. So not just our students, not just our faculty, but everybody. And so I describe myself as a public resource. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people know that if they get jammed up in research, they can call me. And so that's really where my role is. And my subject specialty, I've spent a lot of time, digging through the history of Tampa, through USF. Right. So I've sort of become the go-to guy for, most things Florida, USF related. So I became a curator several years ago rather than just a librarian or archivist. And that's really, it's up to me to help contextualize those materials.
Right.
To help other people make sense of them.
And let's talk a little bit about that real quick for people who don't understand that. Typically, as I understand it, librarians in your position will start in a department like this as an archivist first. And then once you've had that experience and learned, you sort of work your way up to being a curator. That's how it worked with you?
Yeah, sort of. I think so. Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time as a staff member, so a good 6 years before I got a faculty position. Mm-hmm. And so that makes a big difference. The staff members, they just don't get paid as well. There aren't as many avenues for like professional development and things like that. So that was decisive in 2005, becoming a faculty member at the university. And to me, it was sort of a dream fulfilled. I mean, I love splashing around that. that sandbox, whatever you want to call it, because there's...
Well, you can't splash in a sandbox, Andy. Let's be honest. You can splash around in a kiddie pool.
Right.
You can thrash about in a sandbox. But I'm just happy to know you, because you've also taken it upon yourself with your rather large cranium, which houses a rather large brain, so you can hold several thoughts in your head at the same time. And I know, because I know you personally, you really enjoy your work. And you have not only delved into the history of Tampa, but you've gone very specific in a sort of micro way about the culinary history of, and that's what you're doing presently. If I've jumped too far ahead in the story, you can wait and talk about that later. But I don't want to miss the fact that you really are a big fan of Tampa's culinary history.
I am a fanboy, right? Definitely. And that came about pretty early on. I really had the benefit of working with some excellent professors. So most of you are familiar with Gary Mormino. I don't know if there's anyone else in the state who's kind of produced more scholars or inspired more people to become scholars of Florida history. I really don't. I can't think of anyone to compare him to. But and so he was really he encouraged me a lot earlier. Ray Arsenault did as well.
Right.
But, and so early on, I wanted to find a way to sort of get into Tampa's history, and I knew it was really interesting. I grew up in Clearwater, which didn't seem to have much of a history when I grew up there. Whereas Tampa, you could just feel it,
Yeah.
So for me, I was intrigued, and we had, all this amazing food, and I was just sort of, I think, thrown off the shackles of not being too adventurous as a young person. So by the time I got out here, it was just perfect timing to be like, what is this food about, And then I started to become really interested in cooking at the same time, because I really feel like if you're not, if you're studying food and you're not cooking, then I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, what are you doing? Right.
So
cooking and maybe doing some eating, by the way.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of consumption-based research as well. I'm certainly guilty of that. But so I don't know. I just kind of fell in love with Tampa's history, with its food. I still feel like it's a very unexplored topic.
Yes.
And we've become known for certain things like the Cuban sandwich or the deviled crab, but I really feel like that's sort of the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
And I'm just so interested in how things have developed over time. So like a Spanish family who came over in, say, the 1890s, they might make their chicken and yellow rice way different than they did when they first arrived.
Right.
I'm not sure to what extent we can document all that stuff, but it's been a lot of fun to try to get to know some people and hear from them about, how they do it, how their grandparents may have done it. But I feel like that's sort of my last big Tampa project, is to just get into all the food, because in the past I've written books about the Columbia restaurant, their centennial history.
Well, let's just take that moment right now for you to describe the books you have written real quick.
Right. So the Columbia restaurant was in 2009, and they were great at sort of inviting me into the fold and giving me all the information that I needed. So I was really happy with the way that turned out. And I was already working on my own book, which took about 20 years. And I call that's my PhD in like Tampa and Florida history. I never actually attended classes for a PhD, but I spent 20 years steeping in this history. And, when I first graduated with my master's degree, I thought, I'll spend the next year just polishing up my work and we'll make it into a book. And it's like 20 years later, close to 20 years later, actually it was 2020 when I actually finally published From Saloons to Steakhouses, which was really, that's my big opus on Tampa's history, because it's got 10 chapters about 10 totally different things.
I've read the book.
Right, different places. So it's like each one is his own little history of Tampa in a way. So it was a lot of work. And then that same year I worked with Noelle Smith, who worked at the Contemporary Art Museum for many years. And she translated an 1896 book written by a man named Wenceslao Galvez. And he was a Cuban, he was a refugee who came here in 1896. So this is when the Spanish War for Independence, or the Cuban War for Independence, rather, was heating up against the Spanish. So he's one of the people who left rather than starved to death. And so he wrote this intriguing little book about coming to Tampa and telling other Cuban, potential refugees if they should come to Tampa, because Miami didn't really exist yet.
Right.
And so it's just a fascinating look. And I think it's a lesser known book still, because University Press of Florida has published all my books, and that's one I think they didn't expect to sell very much, so it's like a $70 hardcover. Now it's about to go paperback, but for anyone who's interested, I feel like that book is such a cool glimpse into our past and into the Cuban Revolutionary movement. And even if you're looking for skinny on, cemeteries, there's information about that. But also Galvez is just a funny guy. And so he's always sort of taking the piss out of Tampa and the people here. And, and the beach is beautiful, but it can't hold a candle to, Havana, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a lot of fun. And also the best written account about a lector I've ever read before, because he's looking for work and he's trying to become a lector. It's just a great book. So Noel did an amazing job on the translation, so I just wrote a lot of kind of contextual history, an introduction and conclusion, and then some kind of contextual notes throughout. So it was a lot of fun. And then the Cuban Sandwich book came out 2 years after that. So thankfully, I mean, that was all about the lockdown. You know, we got locked down, and I was like, man, I need a project. And it just so happened that that book got greenlit. So I spent a lot of time, and then brought on just ideal partners, Jeff Hauk from the Columbia Restaurant Group and Dr. Barbara Cruz from the College of Education at USF. They were just fabulous. I mean, and it made that helped me get through the lockdown in an amazing fashion.
I can imagine.
Because I had something to fixate on and people to work with, so it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course, I've also read that book. The thing that I'm seeing for those of you, all of you who are not here in the studio with me, is watching your enthusiasm and your passion. I see it coming through you. And what you and I and Mario, all three of us share, is a profound love for Tampa. And once that bug gets in you, it'll never go away. And it's always there inspiring you. You know, I was an artist who came to Ybor City during that artist enclave moment in the 80s. And I had a history degree, and I didn't know anything about Ybor City. And now, today, I conduct history tours in Ybor City, and I'm regarded, I guess, as a lay resident historian. And I say lay, that's the big part of that, because people like Moromino are real, profound historians. But, you know, I'm constantly sharing this great story of Ybor City and Tampa's beginnings with people, and they're astounded by the story. And I'm just giving them the tippy tip of the iceberg. And it's an amazing story. By the way, my casita that I live in Ybor City is right across the street from where Jose Marti gave his final speech. So you see, you can't, when you're in Ybor or in parts of Tampa, you can't turn left or right without bumping into some amazing part of our history. But the cuisine, yes, I get it. And to that end, I have a question. Are you ready for this, Mario? Are you on? Are you listening?
Yes. Yes, and then come back to me on the backside, because I've got a comment.
I figured that much. So here it is. I am constantly informing people of the Cuban Sandwich. They come through the Visitor Information Center. I work there some in Ybor City. So Germans and Canadians and people from around the world are asking about, why are there roosters on the street? What's the deal with the Cuban Sandwich? Okay. I talk about the Mixto Sandwich, and I talk about all that history. Now, let me ask you this. In 1885, when Vicente Martinez Ybor comes here, was there not Swiss cheese in Havana?
Yes.
Okay. So the concept that maybe the sandwich was created by all of the ethnic groups in Ybor City is yes, no, influenced yes. What would be a general response you would have to that?
My response would be that our version of the Cuban sandwich had already been, worked out in Cuba, but there were lots of different versions out there, and we settled on our version, perhaps because of the ethnic groups.
No, that's very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
that's very good, Andy.
The diplomatic way to say it, because I don't think it was like a kumbaya moment where everyone came together and sort of made the sandwich. But I think that, it had something to do with how we chose our sandwich, because we did choose and have a stable sandwich. So back in Cuba in the 1940s, it was still a mixto. It could be just about anything. But here in Tampa, it was becoming something much more stable, where it's the ham, the pork, the salami, and then sometimes turkey.
Yes.
And as late as the 1980s, people were still debating about the turkey. So I think that, Tampa, our mixto is a little more mixed up than we give credit for as well. And so, it wasn't always just these three meats. It was the turkey. And what, pray tell, what ethnic group does that represent?
Right, exactly.
Just the Anglos? I don't know. And turkey was very popular in Cuba, and it showed up in the sandwich a lot. So I think we have a lot of assumptions about what Cuba was and what was available. But, before 1900, Havana was a cosmopolitan city.
Absolutely.
And Tampa was not.
Right.
Not yet.
The king of Spain called it the Pearl of the Caribbean.
Right.
I mean, the reason all that great architecture is down there was because of hundreds of years of an influx of cultural contributions. So this is why when I hear people say, well, it was the Sicilians in Ybor City that introduced the Genoa salami,
right.
I say, well, that's a nice idea, and it may be true to some degree, but I think they might have had Genoa salami in Havana.
Well, the other wrinkle to that is that what I found is that the salami, more than often, before World War II, say, was salchichon. It was not salami. It was a Spanish-style salami.
Right.
So it was still a salami, but it was not Genoa salami.
Right.
And so I think that, we've sort of taken the sandwich of today or the last generation and projected the past onto it, which is understandable.
Right.
But, for me, one of the reasons why I wrote the book was I felt that there was a lot of debate about the sandwich, but nobody was actually trying to wrestle with the truth.
Right.
And it seemed to be more fun as just like a sort of a national pastime, a local pastime of like you grumble about it when you play dominoes and stuff.
Let's argue about the Cuban sandwich.
Right. So,
Andy,
I just felt like I wanted to bring a little light rather than heat to the debate. Mario?
Andy, I have a question for you. A couple of comments here that I've just circled. We were talking about Ybor City and Joe, the fact that he's been here now for 40 plus years. I believe that Jack Espinosa would probably, and you too, Andy, you've earned it, would probably give you an honorary Ybor City Cockroach ID card. Because before that, of course, it was the Tampa Bananas. And this is something in the 40s and 50s that they referred to each other as, right? So if you were from Ybor City, you were an Ybor City Cockroach. And it was something that was a term of endearment. Also, Andy, real quick, you mentioned the Cuban sandwich and you mentioned the devil crab. For 30 bonus points, what is the third member of that holy trinity of Tampeño foods?
I would say crab enchilado. That would be mine.
No, crab enchilado is a standalone meal by itself. But if you're looking at your plate and you've got a Cuban sandwich and you've got a devil crab, what's the other ingredient? What's the other side dish on that plate? And it could be miniature, or it could be the size that they serve you over at Brocado's, which is about the size of a football.
What, stuffed potato?
A stuffed potato, yeah. A stuffed potato. For bonus points.
I don't know if we can take credit for that one.
Probably not, but we should.
But man, is it good.
And nobody's going to argue with us at this point because we're trying to control the narrative.
And Brocado's, like, it's an awful appetizer. How do you expect to eat after eating, like, a grapefruit-sized stuffed potato?
A belly bomb. Yeah.
It really
I think grapefruit size.
And then you're going to eat one of their giant flat top sandwiches. It's like, 2 feet long. So
no, grapefruit size is being a little bit disingenuous because really it's a softball or greater size. And at this point we should say shout out to and props to Joe Brocado, the second generation owner of the Brocado's restaurant, who recently passed, and we honor him by going there and trying to eat all the food that they serve us, because it's you got to have a small group with you. You can buy one sandwich
right.
and feed 4 people. I marvel sometimes at the depth and the breadth of that sandwich. Listen, as we come to the bottom of the hour, and we'll do our station ID here in just a minute, on the back side of the station ID, I want to ask Andy, because this month we are in trying to keep loosely tied to WMNF's topic of the month. I say topic of the month, which is mental health and all that entails mental health issues, mental health help in the community for people that are looking for that kind of, and just the myriad of things that come with that. Andy, we're going to talk to you about why it is that we have this god-awful conflict with us in Miami, and this push-pull and this argument about the Cuban sandwich, not only its origins, but who owns proprietary rights to it. So let's do the ID. We'll give them the phone number to call in on the other side. And then, Andy, I want you to delve down into why it's causing so much mental stress on us.
Hi, I'm JJ Flores.
And Lauren Barth of the Tampa Bay Titans.
You're listening to The Conversation with Mario Nunez
and Joe King Carter on WMNF 88.5 FM, Tampa.
There we go. All right, Andy.
Well, I mean,
Why is it such a point of contention, Andy?
Yeah, it just came about that way. I think, first of all, people in Tampa, so I have to give credit to Paul Dosal, Dr. Paul Dosal, who's no longer at USF, but he was a professor of Latin American history. I was taking his class. He was also Tampa native, and he complained about Miami taking all of the credit for the Cuban sandwich. This is just something, it was not, like an academic discussion. This is something we were just talking, we were having lunch.
Right.
And he's like, yeah, it really steams me that, this is something that is still, and what I noticed as well as, just doing research, like I think, Esquire or Playboy or both, wrote articles about Cuban sandwiches and food in Florida. And each time they just went straight to Miami, and said, the Cuban sandwich was invented in Miami sometime in the 1960s. Yeah, and and even in Miami itself, I was really surprised that they just didn't have any grasp of their own history, because there was plenty of Cuban sandwiches in Miami before 1960 and before Castro and all that. In fact, I found restaurants going back to the 1930s. Now, of course, that's not nearly as far back as the sandwich stretches here in Tampa.
Right.
But no one had actually, explored the history at all. And what really made it possible for me to do a granular study was the fact that all these newspapers and periodicals have been digitized, and now you can search them, keyword search them, which sounds easy, but it's not that easy when you're searching for, say, sandwich in Latin American newspapers, mainly because, say, in the 1890s, any ship going to or from the Hawaiian Islands, those are the Sandwich Islands. So you get a million sandwiches for things that have nothing to do with food. And then also Cubans and other Spanish speakers would use different words for sandwich. They wouldn't necessarily use the word sandwich.
Right.
So anyway, that became an interesting search and a quest to find this stuff. So, every time I found an actual reference, I'm jumping up and down,
Right.
But I, found some neat stuff in Havana newspapers where they actually talk about the sandwich and talk about it very, very passionately.
Do they talk about it as a Cuban sandwich or a mixto?
Yeah, well, a lot of times they don't even bother to name it because, a sandwich is just a sandwich and whatever you put on it.
So you're making the point that Jerry Seinfeld has a joke where he says there are no Chinese restaurants in China.
Right.
If you're Chinese, you're just saying we're going out to a restaurant.
Right.
So likewise, I'm curious about who that first person or group was. I suspect that it's Anglos,
right,
that lived outside of Ybor City that said, let's go down in Ybor City and get one of them Cuban sandwiches.
Right.
Is that sit with your kind of research?
Yeah, and in Havana too. You had a lot of people going to Havana after Cuban independence, and Havana sort of became an unofficial new colony of the United States in a lot of ways. So you had a lot of people, instead of going out west where the frontier had been closed, people were pouring into Cuba looking for opportunities.
Right. So
that really became, the not first contact with kind of the greater Anglo middle culture or whatever, but it was the most voluminous contact. And I've heard a lot of different kind of origin myths, but the best one I've heard about the origins of the Cuban sandwich was that when Americanos first started coming to the island, every kind of Cuban sandwich slinger, worth their salt, would always have roast pork on hand because that's what the Cubans really preferred to eat. But ham was in close second. Right. And ham was the first choice for most Americans because they knew ham. They didn't necessarily know roast pork.
Very interesting.
And so it became, the kind of thing where every sandwich maker had to at least have those on hand. But what I found is a lot of the sandwich makers had other things on hand. So you could get 4 or 5 different meats on a sandwich if you want,
Right.
And that's where we get these kind of multiple layers.
Okay.
And, if a good starting point for the Cuban sandwich is your ham and your pork.
Right.
And then you bling it out with other stuff if you want to.
Right.
The other thing that I found that was really interesting was like one of the first loncheros that was, these are the guys who sliced the meat and made the sandwiches before we had electric slicers and all that. The first time I found it mentioned in a Havana newspaper, he was at the German club. So he's making these elaborate sandwiches using all these wonderful cold cuts that are imported from Germany mostly.
Interesting.
And so, what develops, what I found was that the original Cuban sandwiches, say around 1900, 1905, 1910 in Cuba, were premium items. These were expensive, made with almost entirely with imported ingredients that were being shipped for the first time because you have all this refrigerated shipping for the first time in the late 1800s.
Correct.
And so, that's where, it becomes the story of the Cuban sandwich's creation becomes Cubans, with their faces up against the glass at the local lunchero, which could have been the German club or someplace else, and going like, wow, I want that on my sandwich, and I want some of that, and I want some of that.
Subway.
Yeah, and so ultimately, and then what you have is, when I'm reading about Cuban sandwiches at that era, it's not like a bricklayer sandwich. This is something, if you're a socialite and you're going out at night, you're taking a ride around in your horse-driven coach, or a few years later in your Model T Ford. And, that's what you're doing at night to stay cool. And so if you're a person of means, you're riding around. You're not promenading and walking. You're riding around at night.
Right.
Help you keep cool. And then, of course, you can just pack along one of these sandwiches and eat it for dinner or eat it after dinner or whatever. So it became one of these things where it was very trendy among wealthy people. And it was only over time that it became this kind of thing that everybody could sort of participate in.
Interesting.
And then what I found interesting about it really was in the 1950s, if you look at Havana or you look at Cuba, there's sandwiches at all different price points. So whether you're a bricklayer or a banker or, anything else, you can find yourself, a sandwich that's kind of right for you. It's like hamburgers today. There's cheaper burgers, there's nicer burgers.
Right.
And what happened, the immigration experience changed all that. So you had all these Cubans coming to Miami, Florida, especially after Castro. And the sandwich then became something that, like, I found a story of a guy who became a lonchero in Miami in the 1960s, and he was making the sandwiches himself and couldn't bear to charge more money for cheese because there were so many people who had just enough money to buy a sandwich, and they might not even have enough money for that. So he'd have a junior-sized sandwich that, people could still afford. But he wouldn't put the cheese on it for like 5 years unless people asked for it because he didn't want to add that to the price point.
Wow.
And so what that did to the sandwich over time was it became less elaborate. And in like Miami, they start losing all the other accoutrements. And so forget salami, forget all this other stuff. We're just going to keep it at its very core, which was salami, ham and pork.
Yes.
And your Swiss, et cetera. So it had a profound effect. And so for years after that, and some people still say it today, if you're getting charged more than $5 for a sandwich, you're getting ripped off, Right. And people were saying that $3, $5 being the price point. But that started sometime in the 80s or 90s and lasted for 20 plus years. And the price of everything else is going up.
Right.
But somehow sandwich slingers can't raise the price of their sandwich or you're getting ripped off. No, I think if you pay more for your sandwich, it might be a sandwich worth eating.
Right.
And what I was really afraid of is right around 2000, when I first started really getting interested in this subject, was there weren't any good ones to eat. There were very few that, people who really took pride in the sandwich. And why would you? If everybody just wants to spend $5 and they're going to the gas station because the best one is the cheapest.
Right.
People stopped looking for the best sandwich, and they're only looking for the cheapest. So,
how dare you? How dare you, Andy Hughes? How dare you?
but that's how dishes die. That's how it becomes like, who cares about the Cuban sandwich? It was never good to begin with. And it's like,
Right.
how do we even know if people are making it the same way it was then? So, the lonchero is an important ingredient because that meant that things were still being roasted on the bone,
Right.
and they had to be cut off by hand.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like a sandwich guy in Miami said, the moment we started with the electric slicers, that was the beginning of the end.
Interesting.
For the sandwich. So it's
Interesting.
Isn't that funny?
It is interesting.
Isn't that funny, Andy? Because the moment that we began mechanized cigar rolling, it was the beginning of the end of the industry as we knew it, right? So kind of a little bit of a parallel there. I have a question.
That's fair, yeah.
I have a question for you, and again, we've talked about this before at length, and maybe this would be a good time. Joey, I don't know if you and Jessica have the opportunity or the ability, because I usually sit at the station where we bring in the phone calls, but maybe this might be an opportunity for our listeners to call in the last 20 minutes of the show to give us their favorite or their best version of the Cuban sandwich, where they like to buy their go-to Cuban sandwich. Right now, call in, and here's the number, 813-239-9663. Always send us an email. You can always send us an email, dj@wmnf.org. So what we're looking for is, just be very brief. My favorite Cuban sandwich is at Alessi Bakery. My favorite Cuban sandwich is at La Segunda Central Bakery or at the Flan Factory. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, Andy, I heard you mention the lonchero, and we know that he was a superstar in his day because he could make or break a sandwich. And if he saw a pretty girl, he might even slice that little bit of roast pork or that jamon a little bit thicker. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's the lonchero. But I'm just gonna offer this to you now, that when you create your next fictional account of Ybor City, and you need a protagonist from which to center your story around, that his name be. Are you ready, Andy? Are you sitting down?
I'm ready.
Because I heard you say it earlier. Ready? His name is Sal Chichon. That's his name, Sal Chichon.
I like it.
Okay, so if this is going to be one of those Mickey Spillane, private dick kind of novels, either the protagonist or the criminal could be Sal Chichon. Back to you, Joey. So
Okay.
Please call in.
Yes, please call in. So while we're on this subject, let me also ask you this, because I realize now that I have the greatest possible source right here in front of me. When I first came to Tampa, that would be 50 years ago, there were little Cuban eateries everywhere. I mean, you're just bumping into them everywhere. Good food, large amounts, inexpensive. That has shifted dramatically. Why? Can you give me a more in-depth analytical reason for that, other than the economy?
Well, I mean, tastes have changed a lot too. I mean, if you think about, the old days here in Tampa, like before you arrived.
Right.
I mean, generally there were two choices. There was just American food, and there was sort of the Latin food.
Right.
And there was a little bit of Chinese food here and there, but there was very little, variety.
Right.
And the other thing is that, like, I've been doing a bunch of oral histories with old timers from West Tampa, and they all report eating the same diet. Whether they're Sicilian or Cuban or Spanish, they're all sort of eating from this shared Latin diet. And so
which is kind of generalize that for me a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so it's got some Italian influence, it's got some Cuban influence, but it's really mostly Cuban and Spanish with a little Italian thrown in.
Okay.
And so you might be having, a spaghetti on Sunday, but you're, a partly Spanish, family. So
yes.
So you have a lot of that going on. Rewarrant me. What was the question?
Well, the question was sort of like,
how did it change?
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining things like fast food and various kinds of corporate kinds of influences. I also know that new groups of immigrants have come to Tampa over those 50 years. So, for example, I see little I would call them Latin eateries today that are actually more like Puerto Rican Cuban mix.
Right. There's
like in a Cuban place, you would never see red beans.
Right.
But in the places today, you do. So I'm just wondering. I'm just curious, because I have to tell you that when I came to Ybor City and bought my casita in 1991, there was 9 restaurants, Cuban or Latin restaurants in Ybor City. The most famous, of course, was the Silver Ring.
Right.
But there was the Mercedes, and there was Tony's, and there was a whole group of these restaurants. I mean, I could walk to a different restaurant 7 days a week and
Right.
have lunch. So, and it just seems, in a way, I guess I'm saddened, I guess is what I'm really saying,
Right.
that this has gone away so much.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons for it. I mean, think about, the baby boomers generation here in Tampa. So they're born in Tampa.
Right.
They've inherited this Latin diet, but at the same time, fast food is, making inroads.
Right.
Think of, there was just 30 years ago, there were hardly any tacos in this town. Now,
Yeah.
you can't throw, a stone
Yeah.
without hitting a taco stand
That's it,
somewhere.
yeah.
So like there's been a dramatic change just in the American diet in general.
Yes.
And that's included in all these, children of immigrants.
Yes.
And, it doesn't help that all these people left Ybor City too.
That's
so,
right.
With very few exceptions, most Latin families left. They either moved to West Tampa or they just got out of the Latin enclaves altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're no longer, in Ybor City. They're no longer going to those places unless they go out of their way, to do it. So it's there's a huge sea change. Like, it's hard to believe, but like the Columbia restaurant closed for lunch in the 1970s. I mean, they couldn't keep a lunch.
Wow.
A lunch trade.
I had forgotten that. Yes.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's how desolate Ybor City had become.
Right.
So it's not just Latin restaurants and Cuban restaurants, but it's any kind of business is having a really, really difficult time.
The other thing, too, don't you think is a contributing influence is that Cuban food is basically peasant, working class food, basically. I mean, there's some high-end dishes.
Right.
And therefore, turning a profit, you're not selling a lot of lobster and filet in a Cuban restaurant. You're selling beans and rice, picadillo, boliche. That's what you're selling.
Yeah, you've got razor thin profit margins. It's just like with if you're selling sandwiches.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, the slightest bit of if business starts falling off, you don't have very much wiggle room there.
Well, on this subject, one last thing I want to say to our listening audience, to everybody out there in the world, I am confident of this. I have no desire to be in the restaurant business. But if some resourceful investor could consider this, if you today open up a high-end, nice Cuban restaurant in Ybor City, you'll make a killing because visitors are coming there looking for a Cuban restaurant.
Well, I know we have to go, but the other thing that I should mention is just the diet considerations. In the 1970s and 80s, people wanted to be thin, and starting every meal with beans and rice.
It's a lot of beans and rice, I know.
Cuban bread, not a good idea.
Joey,
yes.
Let me weigh in here, and we all know that as we mentioned beans, we should know that beans, the magical fruit. You know what I mean? I'll leave it right there.
But beans are very healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys, of course they are. But I mean, it's the magical fruit. So you guys can finish that limerick on your own time.
Yeah.
But just as I'm sitting here listening to you guys, I wrote down a list that just instantly popped into my head that I'm sure I'm leaving out at least another dozen or so restaurant names. I'm going to read those to you now, and then we can also discuss the fact that everybody is trying to make a Cuban sandwich. Everybody from Publix to Wawa's is making a Cuban. They're calling it a Cuban sandwich anyway, whether it's blasphemous or not. But places like the Silver Ring, the Columbia, Brocados, as we mentioned before, La C Bakery, La Segunda Central, the Flan Factory, West Tampa Sandwich Shop, La Teresita, Los Gringos, Wright's Gourmet in South Tampa, Publix, as I mentioned, the Tampeño Restaurant on Tampa Bay Boulevard, Wawa's and Carmine's, just to name a few. South Tampa, they have little sandwich shops down there. In Port Tampa, they have even more. Sulphur Springs, North Tampa. Wherever you go, you're going to bump into a version of the Cuban sandwich. And now it has its own little inertia, its own little popularity, because for the last 12, 14 years, we have a food festival, a competition. We had just last weekend a Cuban sandwich eating competition at the anniversary at the El Reloj at the cigar factory owned on the 16th Avenue, the cigar factory owned by the Newman family.
Yes.
So, I mean, I don't even know how that works. I can see how, you can eat hot dogs, perhaps, but how do you eat Cuban sandwiches? And I mean, the winner ate like two. 2 Cuban sandwiches. That's it. Took them 20 minutes. It's a lot of chewing and swallowing. But speak to that, Andy.
Also,
everybody does have their version.
But before he does that, Mario, I think we have a call.
Yes, we have a call.
Get that caller.
We have a call from David in Tampa.
There we go.
David, are you there?
Guys. Yes, I'm here.
Welcome, David.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of best Cuban sandwiches, Silver Ring, at West Shore Plaza, now that they're reopened, I think is up there. And Mr. Empanada, which is a small local chain, actually does a pretty decent Cuban sandwich, too. Mm-hmm. And I missed the Gila sandwich shop, which closed. I don't know when they closed, but they used to be on Hillsborough.
Aguila, right there on Hillsborough. Yep. Yeah, they closed for some reason, but they were probably the best, and unfortunately they're not with us anymore. David, you can find today, if you go down to Los Gringos, and you get there before 3 o'clock because they closed at 3, Mario, that used to work at Aguila, whose family owned the Aguila, is now serving your café con leche at Los Gringos. So, if you want to see Mario and have a coffee with him and eat a Cuban sandwich there, you certainly can. He's still around, and he's wonderful. He's a lot of fun. And I forgot Mr. Empanada, and thank goodness for Nelson Valdez and his entrepreneurship, him and Tim Booth for bringing back, once again, the Silver Ring. Thanks for reminding us, David.
Absolutely. David, I recognize that voice, Mr. White Pepper.
Yes, that's me, yeah.
You thought you were going to sneak in here, didn't you? But
I did.
Yeah, I recognize the voice. Well, thanks for calling, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, White Pep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, buddy.
Okay, so Andy, I think you were tasked to answer a question. What was that question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what was it?
Mario? What was that question, Mario?
The question was, how do you feel about not the variation on the theme, but the fact that everybody has a compunction to get in on this Cuban sandwich craze. Like everybody wants to have one.
Yeah, I mean that's not new though. I found it interesting that department stores like W.T. Grant's back in the 20s and 30s, they were making the sandwich. And as far away as like Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. W.T. Grant's and Liggett's department stores at their lunch counters had what they called a Cuban sandwich. And so, it's part of people have been converting it to like a lunch meat sandwich for a long time. And I think that's, the beginning. It's like, oh, we have some ham and we have some salami and something that passes as roast pork. So we'll just put it together and we'll call it a Cuban.
Right.
But, I think, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing just because I have a theory that one of the reasons why it's so popular is it's just fun to say Cuban sandwich. and it's just like it's fun to say that, you know about the Cuban sandwich.
Yeah.
So I think just that alone, people are like, what is that?
Yeah.
And so they might understand, too, that, at the lunch counter, the department store might not be the best place to get one. But when they get another opportunity to get one, they might get a better one.
There you go. Well, yeah.
So I don't think it's always a bad thing that people want to make it. I don't know. Today, it's become so popular that like every bar, and restaurant seems to have some kind of version of it that may or may not have jalapenos or who knows what on it.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, once again, I think that's not a bad thing.
Well, imitation's flattery, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's more PR for the
yes,
sandwich.
Sir.
I'm thinking to myself aloud now that, the phrase or the little jingle, Jiffy Pop, the magic treat is much fun to make as it is to eat. Those of us of a certain age remember that.
Right.
Can't get it out of our minds. And because Andy just reminded us, the Cuban sandwich is much fun to say as it is to eat. And we've all eaten a few of them in our lifetime. There's a place on Gun Highway, boys, that's named Latin Fresh Market. It used to be back 25 years ago. Alessi Bakery had a little marketplace there. Think, it has a meat market in the back. It has a themed table, and it's got a deli where you can make sandwiches. They make a sandwich there that they call a Puerto Rican, and you can't see me, I'm using air quotes, a Puerto Rican sandwich. And it's basically a Cuban sandwich. They have removed the salami and they put mortadella in. Can you believe that?
Wow.
But, so there's a little modification of it. But again, the base sandwich itself is the ingredients that Andy was referring to, which is the pork.
Mario, we're up against it. We have to go.
I know, but listen, I'm going to let you sign off today because I can't see the call.
Okay, thank you. So listen, Thank you, Jessica Green, the OG, our board up. I want to thank also Joe from Kokomo, Joe Remo from Kokomo. And coming up, Jim Bannon for the afternoon of wonderful music for you.
This is WMNF Tampa.